Now, the Mizpah pieces, these are incredibly popular. So this has its relation back to Genesis 31:49. And Mizpah, for he said, the Lord, watch out between me and thee, when we are absent from one another. And Mizpah is essentially a watchtower or lookout. And there are several Mizpahs in ancient Israel, and this brings the dedication into more context. So let's look at a little bit of its development. Here we've got the sentiment, the love heart, and the Mizpah there. And there we've just got some ivy leaves and Mizpah as well. So from a basic standpoint, the Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent from one another is the most fundamental point to the Bible verse. Simply that the fungible nature of love is transformed by the Lord as it is conduced through him or conducted through him, making the love more pure, holy, honest, and completely with virtue. So between us, the Lord will watch when we are absent, as opposed to looking up at the stars and knowing your loved one is looking down at you from the heavens, or if your loved one who's alive is looking at the same stars. It's really the conduit between the Lord here. That's the piece between the two people. There's a religious connotation that's the Lord is bringing you together even when you're apart. So these were produced in such high volume. And don't ever forget, please, that the religious connotations of many of these symbols for the Victorian period are very much about cultural identity and nationalistic strength and how to behave in a better relationship. So if you introduce this into a society which doesn't have the Christian values that you do, it's essentially a way of those people watching you in a visual medium and your religious elements, and that's exactly how good behavior, quote unquote, should be. It's appropriation. So Mizpah is also a covenant and a warning. So the concept of love and protection, but it's also protection for, in the tale, there are daughters who are protected to protect them from harm. I won't read the entire Bible verses, it's quite long, but protection. So to make sure that anyone who's offending or trying to invade someone's personal space and their lifestyle, well, the Lord is protection. So essentially a very good message, especially when people are traveling. So you could give one of these to your loved one if you are traveling, and the Lord will protect you and the Lord will keep you close together. And they were represented in all sorts of designs, as we can see through these particular pieces. It's still produced today, and it's more of a curiosity statement these days. It's one of the questions I get asked the most is, what does Mizpah mean? It had a resurgence in World War I as well, and that's when mourning and sentimental jewels really fell out of favor. But tokens of affection and pieces like this, which were about protection, still retained their quality and presence, because the sentiment there is very much a solid one. You're going to war, have something which will protect you, and the love between us will still remain. And briefly, I'd like to cover off this very important book, The Illustrated Language of Flowers. Now, the fascination with the Victorians and the natural world, to classify the natural world, goes back to globalization and nationalism. So we looked at the map, an empire where the sun never set. We looked at the various elements that the different cultures were bringing back to the British Empire, whether it was flora or fauna. And we looked at the world above us and the way that the stars are aligning in different countries and different continents and different hemispheres, and how that's being interpreted in symbols and jewellery. But this wasn't a new situation. In 1859, we've got Charles Darwin and his book on the origin of the species, based on his global travel and research. And that's opening the scientific world up to different understandings of life around us. So that was a wonderful catalyst for so many people to understand that the world was a much bigger place. It was a globe, it was an entire international community. But for this particular book by Anna Christian Burke, published in 1856, this one's from the 1870s, is around florography and just the cataloguing of flowers. And this was not a new invention. Henry Phillips published Floral Emblems in 1825. Frederick Schobel published The Language of Flowers with Illustrative Poetry in 1834. And it was really Anna Christian Burke to cement the basic footprint of cataloging for these particular flowers and what their emotional frequency meant. So they all have a meaning. Often love is generally the primary one, or eternity. But there are so many different meanings, and you can see this all the way through Victorian symbols and designs, just like we have today. There it is. So please go out and get a copy if you haven't got one already. And I've catalogued a lot of these on artofmourning.com, but you need to really understand how they were being interpreted. However, does this mean that every designer was using this as a Bible? No. Not everybody was a walking encyclopedia for flora and fauna. It's simply a nice to have, something to reference back to.